Good morning and welcome to this webinar. I'm really excited to be joined by Alex Skinner from Ready Intelligence. Alex, welcome to the webinar, Doing More with Less. Good to have you here.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks very much.
Yeah, well, it's something that we've talked about in several events over the last few months. And so it's a great pleasure to have you here today to be able to dive in more detail into how we can start to use AI within the not-for-profit sector. So my name is Tim Flagg, and I'm the Chief Executive of UKAI. Let me just move on the slides there as well. We've got a little slide with our pictures of us both looking a lot younger. I think I look a lot younger in that picture there. But this is an opportunity for us to really get together with the wider community. So it's great to have you here in the audience. I expect many of you come from different backgrounds in the not-for-profit sector. Over the last few months, we've been interacting with many businesses and organizations who face challenges around AI and how to adopt it. And so we thought in this webinar, we'd bring together some of the learnings that we found, that I've found when I'm out talking to businesses going through AI transformation. And Alex, you've got some great experience of working in the not-for-profit sector with a lot of your customers that you'll be able to share here. So let's get started and get into the first slider. So I think that the challenge, just to frame why we thought this is so important for the not-for-profit sector, is that we know that there are these changes and these pressures in the not-for-profit sector. That demand is rising. People want to do more, but the challenge is also that there isn't funding. The funding which is available is limited. So those two things combined create almost the perfect storm, in that you're feeling overwhelmed. Your team is probably feeling quite exhausted. In that environment, technology does offer a great solution to be able to address exactly that challenge. And that's what we want to talk to you today about, and really sort of help you understand what's holding you back and where technology can fit into that. So we're going to go through around 12 different topics today and take you through some of the learnings. I'm going to give you some of my insights, and then Alex is also going to jump in and give you some of his experience and insights as well. At the end, we're going to have time for some questions and answers. And I really encourage you to be thinking now about what those questions could be as you go through, so that those questions will then help to contextualize what you're hearing. And we can spend about 10 or 15 minutes at the end going through that. So look forward to your questions then. But to start off with, I think it's really important to always define what AI is, because often people will just say very quickly, oh, I need AI, or let's get AI, or I'm a bit worried about AI. AI is just technology, but there are so many different types of technology that sit within this broad frame of AI. I think the majority of time people use the term AI as a shorthand for really talking around chatbots. So most of you, I'm sure, will have used things like OpenAI or Claude or Gemini, some of those chatbots that you've asked questions to, and you're probably using them in your day-to-day. But actually, AI is much, much broader than that. And there's some fundamental things there. There's data science. There's a lot of the predictive analytics. There's visual recognition. There's semantic analysis. There are so many different types of technology and services that sit within that broad term. So I think it's important that when we talk about AI, we realize that it's not just chatbots. So I think that's the first thing. And as a first step, our recommendation to you is to just make sure you understand those different types of AI. We'll come back to talk about that in a bit more detail. Just in terms of the other kind of key first step here is really acknowledging that it can feel really overwhelming. So I think this is true of all of technology over the last 10 or 15 years, that it's been accelerating so quickly that actually everybody feels a bit overwhelmed. I feel a bit overwhelmed, and I'll ask Alex in a minute. But I think we all feel that technology is accelerating so quickly that it's hard to keep up, and that's when we're spending our days just thinking about this. So it's natural for you in your role, in your team, in your organization to feel overwhelmed as well. But the first step is acknowledging that, and then the second step is saying, well, what can we do? And this is what we're trying to unpack today, is talking to your peers, collaborating, knowledge sharing, and coming to events like this where you can hear from other people what they're doing within that space. But Alex, I wanted to bring you in here as well, because I know you deal with a lot of membership organizations and not-for-profit organizations. You're seeing this same sort of challenge.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for people is knowing where to get started. And I think if you look at the sort of ability to make sort of meaningful steps forward using AI. So obviously a lot of the time, context is really the dominant restriction. So we if we look at where people start, chat is kind of the dominant modality, as you say. You whether you're chatting to a some kind of AI bot or agent within a web platform or a website, member coming along and asking questions and sort of getting answers that are grounded in the organizational knowledge, or whether it's people using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot. A lot of the time it's sort of framed around kind of distribution, as in, how do I get these tools to my staff? How do I get these tools to my members? But then really, how do I give these AI agents context that means that the answers that they give are meaningful? So a lot of the time, the big kind of barriers are around, and this is something that sector reports will have gone on about for the last sort of 10 years or so, is really around integration and knowledge being locked up in kind of different silos and different systems, and therefore, organizations at the moment don't have an AI problem, they have a knowledge problem. And actually, the AI exasperates that, because actually it's perfectly easy for you to go and read a document and remember where you stored things. But if you've got things sort of littered across a lot of different systems, that AI doesn't really change that, in terms of so I think in terms of where people are getting started, it's really, their alignment will really align with what are their big challenges in an organization. Are they a kind of resource constrained team that are having to serve a large membership base, having to kind of respond to huge numbers of membership questions or inquiries, and is that their kind of dominant problem as an organization? Or do they have issues around kind of auditing and review and needing to kind of do lots of document and data analysis? So I think where we're seeing people getting started, obviously there's the natural bots that are joining meetings, right? We always see these. There's always a new one that's joining that I've never heard of before, where quite often the bot will turn up before the person does. But yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the organization in terms of where they're getting started and how they're kind of iterating.
Yeah, a couple of great topics there, which we'll come back to in a minute. I think about, you touched upon defining the problem, the business need before we can get started, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But actually, you were talking a lot about how to get started. And actually, to miss this slide out, which is a great quote just before we get on to getting started, which is, there's a lot of concern that AI is going to replace humans. But actually, I think this quote from Sam Altman is actually quite a good way of looking at it, that it's not that AI is going to replace humans, it's that the humans who use AI, who have those skills, they're going to be the ones who replace the humans who don't have those skills. So it's very much around empowering people to have those skills and come on the journey, get on the bus, and then if you are able to get those skills, then being in a good place to get started. The other point I think we wanted to land at the beginning here, just when we're talking around building confidence, is remembering that humans are still essential. Now, you'll probably hear the phrase around humans in the loop, but actually we often think about this as humans are the beginning and the end. So you have to have humans to input, to know what it is that is the problem that you're trying to solve. So that's that first put at the beginning. Humans are the input. The machines do all the processing in the middle, and they do the scaling and the volume. That's great. That's a bit they're really good at. But then at the end, you also need humans to be able to evaluate the output from that process. And those inputs and outputs, really, those are essential human tasks, and they will remain human tasks. But it's just the machines which will speed up the volume in the middle there. So I think also feel reassured that there's always going to be a role there which only humans can do, and particularly within the not-for-profit sector. We'll get on to talking about this in a minute, where there are particular risks around ensuring quality, data, mission, values, principles. These are fundamentally human inputs that you want to brief in, and then there are also things that you want to make sure you are monitoring as they come out of that system as well. So in terms of then getting started, there was a sort of a great way of looking at this, that actually, rather than trying to boil the ocean, let's just start with some small experiments, and try to identify the areas in the business where you can do a small little experiment, and see how that works. Now, the benefit of starting small is that it's something which is which doesn't risk the entire organization. So I think that's important. It also doesn't sort of undermine the trust of the organization. If you try a really big project and it's the first one you've done and it goes wrong, which is likely because often these things take a bit of iteration, if it goes wrong, that undermines a lot of trust you have in that organization. So actually, let's start small with something which is a bit more ring fenced, and then scale up from there. So yeah, I think this is one way of looking at that. Start with one team, with one workflow, and commit to 1 month, and just try that little experiment there. And Alex, wanted to bring you in here as well, because I know that you've seen a lot of your customers, a lot of the organisations using Ready Membership. Do you have some examples there of how they've started small and how that's been useful for them to get started?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, I mean, I can talk, I suppose, in a number of different areas around this in terms of how teams are focused on one particular big hairy problem, right? What is this thing? What is this thing that we're trying to solve that really comes out of as an imperative, I suppose. So, one organization that we're talking to have CPD, continuing professional development. The members effectively largely sort of self-reflect, and it's kind of much more kind of self-driven. But the organization audits a proportion of submissions on a random basis in order to kind of, benchmark the sort of the quality of submissions. And where that kind of was like a 2%, I think, roughly. And then the need came to actually say, well, we're going to raise that. We're going to try and make sure that we're getting to more. We're auditing a higher sort of population of the submissions. Once you get to a position of actually saying, well, look, we are as organizations very document driven. We create documents as a kind of an assemblance of knowledge to be able to communicate it to other people. We take vast amounts of data. We produce reports. In the case of sort of CPD for associations, people submit evidence to kind of support the fact that they're developing in their career in the way that they should be. Now, AI is actually relatively good given the right context, and I'm going to keep banging on about context because in my work, I'm finding that the difference between something doing an okay job these days, it's becoming less about the models. The models are reaching relative parity. They're all really great, right? So a lot of the time, the differentiator now between an open weights or an open source model by another name that you might want to deploy locally, the difference between that and a frontier model like Claude or Claude Opus would predominantly be based on how good a context, how good rules, how much kind of guidance are we giving, and how good a quality is that. And so, yeah, we're certainly seeing that organizations that are kind of starting with an individual problem, but equally, we've actually created a framing template that we're going to release, for free. We're putting the details up of that soon, whereby it takes the user through a series of the questions that they should be asking in terms of identifying the problem. How is the problem solved at the moment? What information do you use to solve the problem? As a human, what context do you have to solve this problem? What information do you gather? What tools do you use? What data do you access? What rules do you follow? What guidance, what standard operating procedures do you as the human follow? Which again, it's all about context that we're giving to actually frame the problem. And then really starting from a perspective of what would the minimum useful version of this look like? You may want your kind of pink pony that flies, right? You'd love it to do all your work for you. But if you were to distill this problem down into kind of the minimum constituent parts that would really accelerate things for you doing this manually, where could AI just start just to take the edge off things? And a good example of that is, the transcripts that we now have from meetings, the fact that it turns up and it transcribes the meeting, that's the base level of utility that makes everything else possible. Clearly, when you start getting into kind of task creation and sort of analysis of a meeting and telling you how to run meetings better, that's obviously additional utility, but it's not the base constituent parts of what makes something useful. So I think we've been setting out sort of recipes and sort of a form to go through to start thinking about how to apply AI. And then from a cohort standpoint, we've been running a cohort whereby cross-departmental people go through and bring their problems and discuss their problems and frame their problems and go through as a group and then meet regularly. But I think the main thing with this is not getting into perfection paralysis and just iterate small, useful pieces so that you can test, rinse, and kind of refine.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that is the key there. So design an experiment that works for your organization, and that's always going to be different because you'll have different sized organizations, different teams, different structures, different goals. But think of this as, you're designing an experiment. This is an example on the screen here. Alex has given some great other examples there from different types of not-for-profit organizations. And think about how you could do this within your organization, design your own experiment. But the principles are: start small, set out some achievable goals, and then see how you get on with that. And I think this leads nicely into talking about asking the right question. And this is something that we see a lot with businesses. So often there'll be that sort of fear that I mentioned at the beginning, both the sort of the anxiety about I'm feeling overwhelmed, but also the fear of missing out. And this, by the way, happens at the board level, at the C-suite level, quite a lot in organizations, as well as within the government. Funnily enough, everybody's facing this same sort of challenge that they know they need to do, again, in quotations, AI, and they kind of rush to try and implement it without thinking about actually what they're trying to achieve. And often what that means is they'll rush to implement the sexy bit of AI, which is a chatbot, which doesn't really answer the specific business needs of the organization. And so often what we say to organizations, and what our members are saying to their organizations as well, is ask the right question. Really define the problem first. Understand what your business needs are, and then the biggest problems, the biggest challenges, the areas which are taking the most resource, which are taking the most time. Identify all of those needs, then think about where technology can fit into that. And often what you'll find is the parts of the technology stack, the different types of AI that we mentioned, often the bits which will actually be really useful in addressing those needs, they might not be the sexy chatbots. They'll be cleaning up the data, having a better database, doing some repetitive tasks, doing some scanning, bringing old archives together, automation workflows. They might be some really relatively boring tasks, but they're so essential. And only when you've got those in place can you then start to do the more advanced, the sexier things, and bringing in those other opportunities. But until you do get those foundations in place, then you're not going to be able to move forward. And more importantly, across the organization, if they see you working on these fundamental things that make a difference, that help improve the business, the organization, for everybody, that's going to get a lot more buy-in from the entire organization than just racing to get a chatbot on board, which then might fail and undermines your credibility and the enthusiasm. So Alex, again, from your experience at Ready Membership, have you been seeing these same sort of challenges?
Yeah, I think keep coming back to the same point, which is recipes. You know, there are consistent recipes of the sorts of problems we can solve. The ingredients change, the outcomes are different, but ultimately there are patterns to these things. You know, whether it's saying, it's a recipe for understanding knowledge and being able to kind of search knowledge at scale, either as a member or as a staff member, or whether it's a validation recipe where it's a case of saying, I need to validate these documents. It's a quality control issue. I need to make sure that these documents that go out meet our standards, our tone of voice from a marketing standpoint. Or, I need to validate that the submissions into my awards business or my submissions for my CPD meet a quality standard, or people are submitting the right data. So there's definitely recipes that are kind of consistent, and the models are different, whether it's a frontier model or whether it's a local model. That's a kind of a subtlety around, data governance and is there personal data, but the recipes remain, right? The brains are different, but the process is the same. I think the big challenge for organizations at the moment is not so much around can I use AI, but it's how can I distribute things. So when we go through these kind of pilots or these POCs, I get to a point where somebody in my team has created something useful. Okay. It's useful for them, it's useful for their individual context. But there's a big difference between creating something which is a nice demo and it works really well in an individualized basis, used, via Claude or used via OpenAI as a project, versus making something production ready and then rolling it out across the organization and supporting it. And I see that one of the problems for me at the moment is that we've really got two distinct camps. We've got the sort of corporate tools that exist, the co-pilots of this world that are kind of controlled by IT and they're running within our kind of corporate context. And then we've got the sort of the chat GPTs and the Claude end of things, where it's very much me wiring in tools as an individual. I think one to really keep an eye on, and I'm sure other vendors will come up with equivalents, is Cowork and the kind of plug-in ecosystem for Cowork. Because for me, it's kind of as fundamental, I think, as the App Store was to iPhones, and why iPhones took off with the App Store, is this kind of ability for us to be able to create reusable recipes or valuable processes that we can then take to the business and distribute out through a controlled manner to make sure only the people who should have access to this do, and so on and so forth. So I think the problem with the AI stuff is it's moving at such pace that really the kind of corporate controls and rollout hasn't really caught up yet. And I think that's probably holding back some organizations as well. They haven't
Yeah.
worked out how to make it fit IT's standards or concerns.
Yeah. And Alex, I should have asked you at the beginning, apologies, to explain a little bit more about Ready Membership, but it's probably quite a good juncture before we get into some of these examples that I know you got on the next couple of slides. Could you just give us a quick overview of what Ready Membership does and how you engage with the not-for-profit sector?
Yeah, so Ready Membership is a product from Pixelate, and as along with Ready Intelligence, and Pixelate as a business is building not-for-profit platforms. Our kind of overarching thesis, I suppose, is that we believe that organizations who want to kind of create sort of frictionless user experiences and want to kind of create a really powerful environment for their members need to have systems that kind of unify data and don't have things locked up in different silos. The idea being that if I know about you as an individual, I'm better able to serve you. So our kind of our Ready Membership platform is a platform that brings together all of the main line of business systems, apart from finance. I'm not building a finance system, so it brings together all of those kind of different platforms into a single place so that you can kind of unify that experience. And then Ready Intelligence builds on top of that to say, okay, well, if we have this kind of unified data platform and then we add our AI layer on top of that, how can we then use what we know about you, or use the context, again, coming back to that word, use the context that we have available to then be able to automate sort of main line of business functions within a membership organization. So the example that you have here is a classic association benefit. So this is the Reward and Employee Benefits Association. Knowledge is a big part of the sort of member benefits. There's sort of quality reports that are available to members. And what they did is they effectively monetized their their sort of higher quality reports in particular area. They created an additional level of subscription. They then supplied effectively an AI chatbot as part of that essentially was grounded in the organizational knowledge and allowed people to interact with the data. Coming back to your point around the use of AI, obviously chatbots are 10 a penny. People are very, these are very common things that people come across on web platforms. But one of the things that we were sort of focusing on was the use of AI behind the scenes, so using vision models to actually make sure that when we've got reports that contain charts, graphs, decision trees, meaningful data represented graphically, that the vision models are actually turning those charts and graphs back into raw data that then the AI can comment on and work with. So, if I've got reports, benchmarking reports, for example, that go from 2022 all the way up to 2025, I'm able to come along and ask questions and ask around data and how that data has changed over time. And the AI is able to give me the answer because it's truly understanding the knowledge that's contained within that, the context. So moving on to the next slide, this is just a sort of, again, a classic UI that allows we see an example of somebody coming in. They're coming on and they're asking a question. So what are the key trends in employee well-being? I could just about read that. And you can see in this particular case, the AI agent is talking to the tools that it's got available. It's not a traditional search experience where it just gives me an answer. What it's doing there is it's doing 3 calls into a different databases and then giving me the answer. But the important thing is that that answer is grounded in the organizational knowledge. And then we have the kind of citation. So it's like I got this answer from page 1 to 6 on this particular PDF, or I got it from minutes 9 to 25 on the webinar. And the other important thing to say is that the sources of knowledge quite often will not be the sources of knowledge that you as a human can make large scale use of. So we're finding in our own use cases that actually video is a far more powerful source of knowledge for organizational context, quite often more so than reports, because so much of our knowledge as an organization is locked up in the meeting transcripts and the webinars and the event recordings, not just the reports that we produce. So that's it's classic chatbot example. And this is another example of really around the same sort of theme. This is the National Association of Local Councils, where their councillors effectively are accessing knowledge, guidance, best practice. Again, slightly more skewed towards a sort of citational, so less embellishment within the answers. So it doing far more a case of this is the document you need to go and read, or this is a summary of what you need to do, but here's where you actually go and get the answers. So I think the other thing to say with AI agents is that sometimes you will dial back its answer. So it could go and give you the complete answer, but if we're working on things that have kind of a legal, implication potentially, what we may do is dial it back so it's very much more of a summary of the answer and then actually a signposting to say, go read this. This is what you need to look at. So having that flexibility to be able to kind of either based on the subject matter, give the full answer and say confidently, this is what you should do, versus just giving a summary and saying, actually, this is the document on the page that you should go and read and interpret. And this comes back to what you were saying earlier, Tim, about the difference between, knowledge access versus judgment, and at what point we push the human to be the one that makes the judgment, or and I would add wisdom in there in the middle, as I say, knowledge, wisdom, judgment. Yeah. And I think you're quite right that AI agents will get to the position that they can apply wisdom, especially if we start talking about sort of organizational knowledge graphs and how that can layer on top and give us some sort of synthesized wisdom. But the judgment piece is still very much in the human domain.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great examples. And I think what we saw there was there's a clear business need or organization need, which could be addressed by the use of technology. And you gave us those examples there using your platform Ready Membership. You've also shared some other examples here where there are many other different types of business organization need. And that's, I suppose, the challenge, isn't it? Because they're all very different. And so each of those different needs will then require a slightly different solution. But maybe could you talk us through just maybe 2 or 3 of these examples here and sort of go from the need to the solution?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of these individual pieces, if you kind of synthesize it out and genericize it a little bit into what is the recipe that it is doing. So in that first example, we have a submission. We have a series of submissions that have come in. We're wanting to kind of sample or review these submissions, and we're wanting to be able to kind of check these submissions against a rule set, against a kind of, and that rule set could either be something that is explicitly defined in terms of this is barrier of what this is the standard that we're expecting of the knowledge that's been submitted, or in fact where we can actually synthesize rules and guidance for an AI by taking 100 really good quality CPD submissions from our members and then reverse engineering effectively some guidance for the agent of saying, look for stuff that is more like this and reject stuff that isn't. So there's a number of different ways that you can deal with that first one. Dynamic content generation is interesting from a perspective of, clearly marketing teams are stretched. Being able to either generate content in other languages dynamically as a consequence, as a consequence of the fact that we want to support more of an international audience. Translation is done, right? For me, it's the one thing that has met a level of quality that it's just done. That's problem solved. It's the standard of translation now has kind of, even with kind of lingual nuance, is really met. But dynamic content generation can also be taking content from raw sources. So after this webinar, if your team wants to produce a blog post, I'm sure they'll take the transcript and use it with AI to actually help, put together any kind of blog post or it's a sort of a natural thing. Personalized content for me is one that is, people talk about AI, but a lot of the time we can deal with personalized content simply by rules in terms of a decent CMS, in terms of saying, on the basis of who you are and your interests or your membership levels, we can show you stuff that's relevant. But where it really gets interesting is that kind of almost like a content concierge, where it's a case of saying, okay, here's everything that's happened across our community, here's everything that's happened across resources that we've submitted, and here is your kind of your digest, your kind of, what's happened across UK AI this week, and that really is very interesting. Summarization of research. Again, I do this a lot. I spend my life looking at kind of AI papers. I'm not great with maths, so quite often it's a case of taking this and sort of, dialing it down a level to sort of make it fit in my brain. So yeah, being able to sort of, reframe this and make it so as if you were talking to a Labrador or a small child, in terms of taking something complicated and refining it.
Alex, just in the interest of time, should we say to
Yeah,
the audience that maybe if there are some of the other use cases here they want more information on, we can come back to that in your Q&A.
absolutely.
Because I think there's some great examples there, but I'm just also conscious that we've got a few slides to get through.
Absolutely.
Thanks. So I wanted to also come on to talking around, now that we've actually seen the application of AI-powered tools within an organization, how do we make sure that we, the humans in the organization, the teams, how are we getting ready for that transformation, and how do we build that mindset? So this is part of one of the key shifts that we've seen, and many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the concept of digital transformation that happened 15 years ago. It was all a buzzword then. And now what we're finding is the companies who've actually gone through that transformation are already ahead. They have a much more agile mindset and culture in their organization. But the majority of organizations haven't gone through that transformation still. And now they're trying to catch up. And combine it with what we were talking about at the beginning, that sort of that fear, that sort of anxiety about having to catch up and move quickly in the age of AI. Those two things are quite they're quite toxic, really, because suddenly people are trying to catch up with something without building in the right culture and mindset. And that's where that becomes problematic. So what do we mean here? I mean, I think it's often that people will rush into trying to just buy one tool and think that that solves their AI problem. They'll maybe sort of run one workshop and it's kind of, treat it almost like PowerPoint or Excel training. Right, I'm going to go and send my team on AI training, and then that's it. They'll be able to do AI, and it doesn't quite work like that, because it's not about just the once and done. It's a continual process, and this is what we mean by the mindset, and that mindset is based upon a number of ways of thinking. I think number one is the curiosity. So really being able to build that curiosity into the culture of your business and empowering your teams to be curious and rewarding them for being curious. That also then leads into being having this culture of experimentation. We talked before about starting small, but really empower people to try things out and test things within safe environments. So make sure that they're not trying to re-engineer everything, or they're not trying to bring agentic in without quite knowing exactly what they're doing, but bring them into that conversation to test and learn and to run these experiments. And then that also builds this resilience and agility in your team. So if they're doing the iterations of experimentation, some of those experiments are going to fail, and that's okay. We have to be okay with failing. That's how we learn. But that it seems like a very simple thing to say, but actually sometimes you need to give your people that permission to fail and then the ability to learn. And that then will build both the resilience in them, but also the agility in your organization. So on the screen here, we talk around fear blocking the experimentation, and it's important to recognize that is often one of the biggest blockers to experimentation. And sometimes there's policies in place. Policies are there for the right reasons, and I'm conscious a lot of the organizations here you'll have policies in place because you are not-for-profits, you're governed by boards of trustees. You have to have that in place. Policies are good, but it's ensuring that they don't block giving people the permission to be curious and to be able to experiment. So trying to balance those two things. And I think also leadership has a really key role to play here. The leaders, you need to be able to give direction. You need to be able to empower your teams from the bottom up to be curious and to try things out. And try and not just say from the top, we need to have an AI, and putting the sort of like the fear and the pressure on the teams to kind of like build this thing. Allow them to come up with the concepts and to test them out across the organization. So just before we go on to the next section there, I think, Alex, I know you've been sort of quite involved over the last decade or so with transformation. What insights do you have on how not-for-profit organizations are approaching this whole concept of cultural change?
I mean, I think the big problem is around how a lot of these organizations are used to doing procurement. I mean, and there's an inherent maturity thing here. So if you say, for example, main line of business systems like CRMs and AMS systems that run organizations, people have an understanding of what these systems do. They have an understanding of what good looks like. If they want to go out to market and buy a new one, they put together a tender. They put together requirements. They go to market for tooling in a very kind of process driven way. The problem with AI tools is that there isn't necessarily a standard. When everything says it's a chatbot, when everything says it's very intelligent, very usable, how do you assess the sort of the inherent quality and sort of fitness for purpose for the organization? So I think fear does block experimentation. I think that is we're definitely seeing that in terms of not being ready. We have too many other problems. We're not ready. We don't have the time to spend on this. We've got to sort our other problems out first. But coming back to that point of restriction or fear, it's really looking at what the most useful version of a tool could be. If we don't feel capable, our policies don't yet allow us to have an AI agent public facing. We haven't done. We're not culturally ready for that yet. We can still have AI agents that are used by our customer services team to still take the questions from members and look for answers or look for resources that we then as humans manually consume and then use to actually manually go and answer the question. So there's coming back to the kind of minimum useful version of things, building confidence, But also testing builds confidence. So a good example is if we take, the last 1,000 inquiries that have come into our business, perhaps using Zendesk or some kind of ticketing system or email, and we then run through those inquiries and then compare the answers that the human gave against what the AI agent is giving. If we're then able to assess that 97% of all answers were, equivalent thereof, metrics help build confidence, rather than just sort of saying, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine and waiting to see the answer. So I think evidence is a great way of, data speaks volumes, right? So I think that's a great way of communicating upwards in order to kind of build permission.
Yeah, that really well said there. I think data is always objective, isn't it? So whenever you're having a debate about something, or if you want to take something to your board, if you can come and bring data, it just is like a
Yeah.
fact. You
Yeah,
can
yeah,
refer
yeah.
to great point. The other side of data, of course, is around data security and the risk inherent in that. And I mentioned before that a lot of organizations in the not for profit sector will have particularly sensitive data, or they'll be concerned around the data. And this is something that's come up when we've been in face-to-face sessions. So I wanted to sort of look at how we address some of the sensitivity around keeping data safe and managing risk, because within this kind of AI tech stack that we've been discussing, yes, it is important to bring the organization's data in and to use it to be able to do some of these interesting things we've been talking about, whether it's creating a chat bot or whether it's doing some analysis or whatever it is. But we also need to think about some of the risks and vulnerabilities within those systems that we're building. I won't go off at too much of a tangent, but just quickly mention agentic, which is one of the new areas in AI that particularly this year is a lot of people are talking about. But it's one of those areas where the technology is accelerating really quickly. People are acting out of fear of missing out, and they're trying to adopt agentic into their organization, and they're not thinking about the risks, particularly the cybersecurity risks. And because it's such a new technology, there are many more vulnerabilities in there. So what we're seeing now is even within that space, which is only 6 months old, really, people are now saying, slow down and really think about the good governance here, how to do this in a much more responsible way, how to have that those code of conducts, those checklists. Just think about the cybersecurity risks. Think about how we're going to do this rather than racing ahead. But I know you've got experience, Alex, of sort of building some of these systems and addressing some of these risks. So how are you managing risk, and what would be your advice on managing that risk?
Yeah, so I think if you break it down into, I mean, a lot of the time, a lot of the things we spend time on is not really AI problems. It's engineering problems, it's architecture problems, it's issues of sort of, data governance, data residency. I mean, I think if you break it down and say, okay, if we look purely at the brain element of things, obviously we've got the frontier models like, Claude, Opus, and GPT, but there's going to be different use cases and different brains that need to be used in different scenarios. Now, there may be certain use cases where I'm very comfortable using Opus, I'm very comfortable using GPT, hosted by OpenAI and Anthropic. There may be other times when I want to have it running in my own tenant, either within Azure or via Amazon and Bedrock. There may be times that there may be a geographical concern. I mean, there are those with significant concerns around sending data to the US. So in those particular cases, model providers like Mistral, which are EU based, coming down to actually being able to run your own models on your own hardware or hardware that you control. So there's a lot of flexibility, and the delta between what these frontier models are capable of versus what open weights models that you can run yourself as an organization have really compressed. We can find that some of these open weights models now are really comparable with sort of Sonnet 4.5, which is only the last release of Claude. And once you start talking about that, you do eventually reach a point where good is good enough. You don't replace a junior administrator in your finance team just because a PhD candidate becomes available. It's about what it is that you're looking to solve. So I think from a practical standpoint, it is architecture. It's an IT problem. But from a practical standpoint, there are solutions now to each concern that doesn't involve not doing.
Yeah, thank you, and that's useful to get that context. One of the other questions that comes up quite a lot is around how do organisations choose the right tools and partners to work with. I referred at the beginning to that feeling of being very overwhelmed. Everyone feels overwhelmed at the moment because of the technology increasing at the speed of change, but it's also the volume of new solutions out there. So we have a limited number of those foundation models, but there are literally thousands of new applications that use those foundation models, thousands of new vendors who are coming out and offering to do X, Y, and Z. Your quick answer on this one, then we'll move on to the next section. But Alex, you're right in the thick of it, and obviously you provide a service here. But what general advice do you have for being able to choose tools and partners, and what advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is there is no one solution for everything. I think that's really important. I think anybody selling an AI platform and saying that it does everything and it should be used for all purposes is snake oil. I think it's really looking at where the people are, that are needing to use things. If your predominant use case is around getting efficiency with meetings, then the sort of the chatbots that are in the place, the AI that's in the places where work is getting done, I think is the most important thing. So I think from a perspective of not ending up with a situation where we have all our data locked up in individual systems and now we have AI agents on all of these individual systems. We're reinforcing the silos, but now we're putting AI into each of the silos as well. So I think there is an argument for trying to centralize organizational knowledge, trying to bring together a central context that we can use across our business. But for most organizations, that's not the place to start. The place to start is, where is work getting done? If work is getting done in Office, then Copilot's great, but it still will be limited based on the context that's available. And I think it's really just not signing hugely long contracts with any vendor right now,
Yeah.
because this stuff is changing too fast to do that, I think.
Yeah, it's that point we were making before about doing those little small experiments and testing things out a little bit. It applies here very much as well. A lot of organizations will, I'm sure, have Copilots or playing around with Copilots. It's often embedded within the system, so that feels like a natural place to start. But I think it's also important to then empower people to try a few experiments on other tools as well, and be conscious that people, if they're not encouraged to do that within the organization, they might be doing it outside of the organization. It's better to have them within and be able to govern them. And I think that relates to this concept of responsible AI as well. So as the trade body for AI businesses in the UK, that's what we at UKAI are very much focused on. And we're very pleased to have Pixalate Ready membership as a member. Often what we find, a lot of our members, the reason they want to join us as a trade body is because we represent responsible AI. So I'd say, as a piece of advice, maybe look at what organizations the vendors and the tools belong to. Do they subscribe to organizations that are interested in making a much more responsible industry, or not? And choose wisely, because I think particularly within the not-for-profit sector, it is important to ensure you have those principles. So I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 12 minutes. Just a reminder as well that this is your opportunity to put questions to us. So we'll take a break in about 2 or 3 minutes and come to some Q&A. So do you have some questions ready? Otherwise, we can give you some more insights there. Skills training and internal capability is really important. And I referred to it before as, it's not just once and done. You need to continually be building that capability. But there's very different skills you need from the leadership team to empower them to really understand and educate them on what AI is, and then how to lead. And that's sort of, the sort of leadership training at the top there. There's manager training in the middle, which is often very practitioner based, very focused around to specific functions. And then the most important area is the everyday AI training. And that's an area where we really campaign around this at a national level, because it's so important that people feel the confidence to be able to use and engage with the basic AI tools. And once they've got the confidence to try that, it can be quite transformative in their lives. So I think, it's really important to get that broader engagement. In terms of staying mission led, this is part of the, this is very much the core thesis of what we're talking about here, that actually AI is a technology and it should be able to serve whatever the mission of your organization is. We've seen some examples where organizations get the technology on board and it sort of changes where they're going. And that's sort of, it's a shame, but I can understand why. It's when they sort of start get wedded to some of these technologies and they're very powerful, and when they're very they're sort of moving very quickly, that often starts to define what they are doing there. Well, to come with this concept of measuring what matters as well. So the concept here is that we all need KPIs. That's something that within organizations we're constantly thinking about KPIs. We'll be setting KPIs, measuring those KPIs within the context of driving AI transformation, building that AI culture, empowering your teams. It's important to think a little bit wider around what those KPIs are. And we often will talk about these three things. So measuring confidence, ensuring that you've got some sort of measure set up that works for your organization about how confident they are to experiment and to play with AI powered tools. So that's one really important measure. And I referenced before the work we're doing at a national level to ensure that young people and displaced workers of all ages across the country have this confidence to be able to engage with and use AI. But it's really important in your organization as well. We've talked about curiosity a lot. That is key. So how can you use that? How can you encourage that? How can you measure that in your organization? Set a KPI around that. And then momentum. It's great to get these things going and to try them out, but you need to be able to measure that momentum. How many people are getting trained, how many people are trying out and experimenting things, and look at how that's building over time. You want to be able to have a metric that allows you to measure how that is increasing over time. So the last point, and then we'll just do a quick summary. And again, do think of any questions that you'd like us to answer, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom there. Collaboration. So this is really key. And, I know that particularly in the not-for-profit sector, you're actually great at collaborating, probably more so than in the private sector. But collaboration is really key here to be able to share those learnings. So find ways of bringing together forums of people in your sector at your level to talk about how they're using AI and how they're using it in their particular context, and come to events like this. Hopefully that's what we've been able to do today, is share some of those examples of how other organizations are using AI. So I'm just going to kind of whiz through this because I want to get to some questions as well. I think it's really important to give permission, but I'll come back to that in this wrap up, which is we are doing more with less here. That's the whole concept. The 10 key areas, which is a bit of a summary of what we talked about. Start with that business case. Make sure you understand why you're doing this. What is it your organization needs? And then work out what the solution is. I think it's really important to also understand AI. So challenge yourself, challenge your team to understand what AI is, and don't just see it as just being the chatbots and the foundation models. Get hands-on. There's many courses, and find ways of being able to get your leadership team to really get hands-on and to get practical with that. Mindset and culture, we talked about that a lot. That is critical to be able to drive not just a one-off change, but a long-term organizational change. And this really comes down to leadership. Leadership have a critical role to play here, to set the clarity, the vision, but most importantly, to give permission to the organization to come on this journey. Planning, always key. Pick a clear starting point there. And then system. We're not just building individual tools. We're thinking about this at a systemic level. Learning culture. We've talked about learning a little bit. Training is a key part. And we've got a number of partners at UKAI who deliver all of those levels of training, from leadership to manager level, practitioner level, and then everyday AI. But it's important to look at it as a whole culture of your organization. And then thinking about in practice, actually, and also this is the KPI point, measure what matters. measure what's getting done. And yeah, let me just, I'll leave this on screen now as we come to the Q&A session, because I'm very keen that we do manage to get some Q&As in here as well. So could we have more detail on 7? What are the most useful areas of tools for nonprofits? What can we use for HR, for writing fundraising content, for summarizing impact, measurement data, etc.? Yeah, I guess that's a question. Maybe Alex, can I get you to come in on that one? What are the most useful areas or tools for nonprofits? What can we use for HR, for writing fundraising content, for summarizing impact measurement data?
I mean, I think a lot of this will come down to preferences in terms of, in much like the sort of the Zoom versus Teams debate, it will come down to, Google versus, use of Google Workspace versus Microsoft, the world of Microsoft, or indeed sort of ChatGPT versus Claude. For me, I think it's that kind of a semblance of context. So if you say, for example, if I take Claude as an example, we love Claude, we use it throughout our business alongside the tools that we produce. So whereas we do use our own tools, we also use the we use Ready Intelligence as a way of bringing together our organizational context. But then where people get work done is within the likes of Claude Cowork or tools like that. So I think if as a sort of a starting position, either Claude Cowork or Frontier from OpenAI, as a way of bringing together sort of projects and saying, okay, I'm going to bring together some context. So in the case of impact measurement, there's going to be some reports and data that I'm going to need to make available. So I'm bringing together the context into sort of either projects or the sort of the co-work equivalent of working on a task and bringing data available. So I would say that tools like either co-work or GPT are a great place to start. Always the paid editions, never the free editions. It's vital that organizations don't start loading sensitive data into the free editions of these tools, because quite often the free also accompanies sort of language around we're training on your data and you're fine with that because that's why it's free. So I think it's really important for organizations to pay for tools so that they can check the check boxes around responsible data management. I think other places to start is really around meeting transcribers, though that's sort of general utility. I know that in Claude Cowork there is an HR skill which is specifically a plugin that can be installed around HR management. Personally, it's not top of my list in terms of automating that function. I see it as a higher risk area. But certainly from a data analysis standpoint, I think either of those two platforms, either Claude or OpenAI, would be a good place to start.
Great, thank you, Alex. And yeah, I think a key thing you mentioned there about using some of these models like Claude and OpenAI, there is in the settings a setting where you can switch off sharing your training data or sharing your data with the models to use as training data. And it's important that you find that setting and switch it off. Just do it anyway. Just do it now, because that then means that anything you put into ChatGPT or Claude doesn't get sent. So that's a critical thing to change there.
Just on that point, I mean, it's a really important nuance. And I think if you take, for example, data leakage. So if you take, for example, where somebody may put something on a website, they don't permission it, it gets indexed by Google, they can go to Google, they say, can they take this down? It's sensitive, it shouldn't be there. The problem with AI training is once the model knows about it, there is no route to unknow it, for an organization. So it is really, really important that people are using, that they are, before they're putting sensitive information into a model, that they are making sure that they've got all the right things checked.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got another question here. What would be the minimal level of AI governance expected to be set up as we start our mission-led AI? So minimal level of governance, that's a good question. I mean, I think I might have a view on that as well, but Alex, do you want to kick that one off?
I mean, I think for the not-for-profit sector, there are some really good consultancies out there that help organizations. You and I, Tim, spoke at the Heart Square TechSmart event, which was a not-for-profit event, and Heart Square is an example of one such consultancy that can help organizations put together, that kind of AI governance framework, So I think, and I think the next question is very
Yeah.
valid in terms of, starting small doesn't mean, jumping straight in and worrying about the consequences later. I mean, that's not quite what that said, but that's how I read it. So um, coming up with a base level of sort of governance in terms of outline policy of this is what we do, this is what we don't do, this is where we use it, this is where we won't use it. I mean, that's a good starting position, but there are some great free resources out there around how to put these kind of things together that I'm sure we can signpost.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So Timothy's gone on to ask, can you please talk a little bit more about how to start small, how to ensure that start small does not become deploy first, govern later. So, we were saying before, great to get started small, set yourself these small experiments, play around, etc. And she's kind of saying, well, how do we make sure that we don't then forget about governance along the way?
Yeah.
And you're right, Timothy, it is really critical to be thinking about governance from early on in that sort of journey. But I suppose it's almost like two things. One, think about this of what we were talking about as almost like playing and just customizing people within an environment where it's not at scale, it's not reusing any sensitive data, it's not going to be, it's minimal risk. So maybe if we say experiment, but within a minimal risk environment, and then once you've got to that stage where you want to try things and deploy them, know what that sort of that threshold is and get the governance in place. It is critical to think about all of those, and I suppose to familiarize yourself, and this is where the tension maybe comes back in an organization between whoever is not just the chief technical officer, but the chief information officer, the chief security officer. There's many roles, and sometimes that's the same person, but they have to have oversight and have to know what's going on. But then the rest of the organization also, they should be encouraged to be testing some of these things out. At some point, those need to come together, and you need to be able to then plan a process to get governance in as you start to scale these up as well.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't have to be a sort of a war and peace policy. You can start small and iterate. But as you said, Tim, if you're not using it in areas where you're applying personal data, if you're not processing things, if you're not making judgments on the basis of AI, there are certain areas of work that are lower risk and kind of more definable that are, still give you the confidence to understand what you can do next.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the regulations that we have in the UK are designed to create cultures of people looking for the right principles. And so I think that again is part of, as Alex was saying, start with a few basic principles, and actually the process of you thinking, going and researching what is good governance around AI in my organization, you'll start to uncover some of the principles, whether that be around data security, whether it be about sensitive data. And so it's applying that same sort of curiosity and that sort of iterative process to governance. And then as you do that, you can build those sort of principles into your organization. When you get to that threshold where things are starting to scale, that's when you definitely do need to then seek some more professional advice and get proper regulatory governance in place. Okay, well, I think we're a couple of minutes over time there, but hopefully that's been useful for the audience there. We've covered a lot of ground. You can see that we cover a lot of this, actually. And if you're interested in finding out more about the training which UKAI offer through our partners, we offer the training at the senior level, the manager practitioner level, and that sort of everyday AI adoption across teams, then please do click on the link here. The green link at the top, the yellow link at the bottom is training. And if you're interested in finding out more about UKAI, the trade association for AI businesses, then please click on the top link. But it's been great. And thank you very much to Alex for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and telling us more about how you're approaching this at Ready Intelligence from Pixalate. It's been great to have you. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks very much.
And thank you to the audience for those great questions. And see you again next time. Thanks.